How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? Adrock is back with another WoW BFA dungeon guide, this time for the Motherlode! There's a lot going on here, so we're going to jump right into it after these quick refreshers. 1. Do not stand in the fire. I don't know how many times I have to tell you this. 2. Be awesome and help your friends out. Dispel them, stun the kicks, all that fun stuff. Speaking of which, there's number 3. Stun. Interrupt. Do it all. Anything to make your life easier. And lastly, if we're not talking about it, tank and spank, or the abilities are just not worth the mentioning and they're not that dangerous in relativity. So let's get into it right away with the refreshment vendor. They've got 2 abilities that are a pain in the butt. The first one is Ice Spritzer, which hits a random target, dealing ticking damage and reducing your movement speed by 15% over the 6-second channel. The final tick will apply Brain Freeze, a magic debuff which stuns the player for 6 seconds. Interrupt it, obviously. Kaja Refresher is a 1.5 second cast that applies a buff to a damaged mob that heals them for part of their maximum health every 2 seconds. This is the big one you really should interrupt over everything else. The mech jockeys are also a big deal, so watch out for them. Yeah, grease gun, but concussion charge is actually going to lock on a random player, and after 2 or 3 seconds when the charge lands, it'll deal damage and knock back any players in the landing zone. Obviously, once you see it, move around, but it's annoying. They will also go after their giant mechs. If they get inside it, you have to fight the mech, and then once the mech's down, the jockey picks back up. If you see a mech jockey running for the mech, you have 5 seconds, and you have to hard CC them with like a stun or a displacement. That way, they will not get in. Once you interrupt it, they will not go back to try and get into the mech. Speaking of these mechs, they have 3 big abilities that are annoying. They first off have an energy shield, which will root them in place and put a shield in one direction. Anything coming into that shield will be negated. You can get around that by walking around them, or blinking around them, just get around them. They also will cast Charge Claw, which is uninterruptible, and will deal damage to a player, then jump to 3 nearby players. Mechanized Peacekeepers will also shoot out tear gas. The gas, it disorients you if you get into it for 3 seconds. It's annoying, just you gotta be careful. You got a lot of things happening and not a lot of room to move around. Hired Assassins also really get annoying with the toxic blades they have on, and the Hail of Fletchettes cats will also apply these toxic blades. Adult Thugs are just big and annoying. They'll do a close-on ability which charges a player that's uninterruptible and stun them for 2 seconds. And now we move on to the first big boss of the Motherlode! The coin-operated Crowd Pummeler. This guy has a lot of fun mechanics and a nasty one on Heroic and Mythic. The biggest ability you have to look out for is the Pummeler's Foot Bomb Launcher. He will throw out a bunch of foot bombs that after 15 seconds will deal damage to the entire group and apply Blazing Azerite, which increases the amount of damage you take by 50% for 15 seconds. To prevent the detonation, simply look at the ball, aim it at the Pummeler, you'll see an indicator, and kick it at him. That'll hit him instead and not hurt you. Tanks, make sure you keep the Pummeler away from the group, as its Shocking Claw will stun all players in front for 3 seconds. Static Pulse is just moderate, unavoidable damage. It's going to happen here and there. But on Heroic and Mythic, a new mechanic gets introduced. The crowd actually will throw coins that form around the boss, and he will have a magnet that goes off and sucks in any piles within 15 yards. Each pile gives him a stack of Pay to Win, increasing the damage by 10%. It's a permanent buff, so you don't want too many of these coins to come around, and if you see them, the tank needs to move the boss at least 15 yards away so the magnet does not collect any coins. The quicker you can burn him down in Heroic and Mythic, the better, and the more you can keep him away from those coins, and with it back towards the players, the easier time you'll have. Moving on, as you make your way to Azerokk, you'll run into the Wanton Sappers. These guys are kind of ridiculous. They have mining charges that they'll throw at players. You just gotta move away before it explodes, but when they die, they throw a bunch of charges around you. When they're in packs like this, it gets ridiculous. If they get around 20% health and don't die fast enough, they'll fixate on a random player and begin to cast Final Blast, which will pretty much just kamikaze them and then do the bombs all around them again. It's a lot of fun. The Ventrico Earthshapers have 2 abilities, one of which it's nice to interrupt, the other one you need to interrupt. The nice one is the Rock Lance. It's a 3.5 second interruptible cast, which will deal a bunch of energy and do a dot to a random player. Yeah, you can interrupt this, but save this for the Earth Shield. It's like the Shaman's Earth Shield. Gives them a 10% reduction to damage, and every time they're hit, they get healed for 10% of their health. Interrupt this as soon as possible. If it gets through, purge it because the fight just takes too long afterwards. Azerite Extractors will channel Power Through, which is the 5-second channel that hits all players in front of them. Tanks just turn them away. The Stone Fury Elementals will have Furious Quake, which is a 3-second cast and it lasts for 6 seconds. It deals a bunch of nature damage and reduces your movement speed by 60%. This should be a high priority interrupt and kill because this thing can make for a nasty fight. They'll also cast Tectonic Barrier, which is a 2.5 second interruptible cast, which makes them absorb incoming damage and making them immune for interrupts. It's very dangerous because if you combo Tectonic Barrier with Furious Quake, it just can be a very problematic fight. Right before Azerokk, you run into Taskmaster Ascari. He has two different Earthshapers and Wanton Sappers with them, so they're kind of annoying. We already covered them. But Ascari itself will cast Cover. Make sure the tank moves it away from the trash mobs because this is a 6-second channel that redirects 50% of the damage taken to the allies to the Taskmaster, and then reduces that damage by 75%. When Taskmaster Ascari reaches low health, 20%ish I guess, he'll throw down the shield and just start dueling. Honestly, after that, just burn him down. And here lies Azerokk. If you look really closely to the left-hand side of the fight, before you start this single-phase encounter, you'll see 2 fracking totems. You can use these on 2 of the 4 Earth Rager ads. Basically, because you don't want the extra ads in the fight, you'll have to constantly kite these guys because they will do a jagged cut, which is a stacking 10-second physical damage dot. You can crowd control Earth Ragers on top using the fracking totem, so paralysis, slows, I think polymorphs even work, displacements and and misdirects also work. The reason why you want to do this is because it just makes the Azerokk fight much easier. Azerokk himself will actually do an Azerite Infusion, which will free one of the Earthshakers from crowd control and increase the damage it takes by 150, but the damage it does by 50%. Anything that has an Azerite Infusion should be focused and killed down as quickly as possible. Throughout the fight, Azerokk will also summon additional Earth Ragers with Call Earth Rager. He'll also do a Resonant Pulse, which causes all non-crowd controlled Earth Ragers to channel Resonant Quake, which just means a ton of earthquakes, a ton of damage, it's 60% slow, and it's way too much to deal with. When that happens, you have to keep the ads under control and block as many of those resonant quakes as possible. On heroic and mythic difficulty, Azerokk will gain access to Tectonic Smash. It'll knock down and deal damage to all players in a cone in front of him. It initially faces the tank, so obviously you want to keep Azerokk facing away from the group, and then you can sidestep the cone. Here's a little friendly PSA. Use the minecart, because that's a minefield, a literal minefield, and I've seen enough players think, derp, 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 I can walk down this, why am I dead? So the Feckless Assistants will cast Blowtorch towards the tank. For 2 seconds, it is high fire damage. Tanks, please turn them away from your group, but also keep an eye on the assistants because they will attempt to turn themselves into something bigger with the Transfiguration Serum. It's a 5-second cast, and if it goes through, it gets all its health back, then does a Festering Bite on a random nearby player, giving you a 10-second disease dot. That cast is uninterruptible, but luckily the disease debuff can be dispelled. The weapon testers have actually 2 powerful abilities you should keep an eye out on. First off is the Force Cannon, which is a 3-second uninterruptible cast, which hits all players in a 40-yard cone, hits them and knocks them back. This is really bad if you actually get knocked back into more groups of trash, which then makes the fight really unmanageable. Luckily, once they start to cast it, they do not move, so you can sidestep it. Tanks, be aware of Echo Blade. It is a death grip to all players in a 20-yard cone in front of the weapons tester, so make sure you turn them around. Here's the thing though, once you're gripped you get a 4-second silence. Once that happens, you want to make sure that your healers can quickly dispel that ability, that way you can survive on higher difficulties. The biggest ability to watch out for from the Venture-Co Alchemist is Transmute Enemy to Goo. It's a 4-second cast you can get rid of, because if it does go off, it turns somebody into a goo for 10 seconds. Yay. That's high priority. Venture-Co Masterminds are pretty nasty. First off, they have Energy Lash, which will hit a random player for 6 seconds and do pretty decent damage. Healers, make sure you spot heal this player, that way they don't, die. Azerite Injection will happen to a trash mob, which will give them a heal buff for every 2 seconds and increases their damage for 15%. Purge it when you can. The Leech Globule will actually send a dark orb in a straight line. All the players within 6 yards of that orb will take ticking damage, and every time it does damage, it heals the Mastermind. Sidestep it. It's a pretty big 6-yard gap, so make sure you mind your path. I was initially going to ignore the test subjects, but they actually do an on-hit melee attack, which will get a stacking 20% physical damage increase for every 2 seconds, and they will get worse with the Azerite Enriched Blood passive. When you have low health, just cleave them, no big deal. But this can be really bad on Mythic Keystones and higher, so keep that in mind. So Rixxa Fluxflame is actually a pretty fun single phase encounter. You have to actually position her pretty decently, and some of the abilities you kind of have to just deal with because it happens so fast. So let's get into them. First off, it won't just be auto attacking, she'll hit you with Searing Reagent that deals moderate damage. Make sure that you have the tank mostly pointing her away, although it's going to get kind of hard as I will soon explain. She will frequently cast Chemical Burn, which is a 10-second debuff to 2 players, usually, tank and the melee because they're closer. It deals moderate damage. Healers, just keep an eye out for that. Here's the big things. Rixxa will spray locations at a random player with Azerite Catalyst. Anytime this happens, it'll leave little pools of Azerite that deal damage the longer you stand on them. This is easier to deal with for ranged players than it is melee players because it happens so fast. If you're a ranged character, please stay on the outer edge of the platform. That way when you get those puddles, it just drops there and makes life easier for everybody. Melee, I'm sorry, you are most likely not able to move fast enough for this to happen, so you have to be very mindful of where you're at and try not to make sure you can cross over paths and hurt yourself later on in the fight. I say this because she'll combo this with Repellent Blast. She'll face the location of a random player, then put out, Propellant Spray. This will deal damage you and push you away. Luckily, it also pushes the Azerite Catalyst. Here, I did not say get rid of it. It pushes it. Obviously, if it gets past the platform, it'll remove from the encounter, so that's fine. That's why you want to position it as far away from her as you can to give yourself the maximum amount of mobility. You want to make sure you understand this because on the higher difficulties, Heroic and Mythic, the Azerite Catalyst will spew out from pipes around the area with the Gushing Catalyst. You will see a big swirl move out of the way, but it happens pretty quick, so you have to be quick on your feet. This means that you want to make sure you push your puddles that get dropped from Rixxa as close as possible. When she uses Propellant Blast, it'll move them around, so your positioning really matters in this fight. On your way up to the final boss, you'll run into these crawler mines. They'll look like nothing when they're on the ground, but if you get close to it, it'll pop up and fixate on a random player with Seek and Destroy. You want to burn this thing down as fast as possible, because if it gets to that player, it'll explode, damaging everyone within an area, and apply an 8-second dot. Ordnance specialists have a 2.5-second cast called Artillery Barrage. You cannot stop this unless you stun it. If the cast does go through, you'll see a bunch of swirls and move. If you're hit, you get a 6-second fire damage dot. It's annoying. Venture Company Sky Scorchers don't hit the melee tank, they have Buster Shot instead. They also bring back the Concussion Charge. They also have an ability called Azerite Heartseeker. It's an uninterruptible cast which has a projectile fired at a random player. You can easily see who it is, and the first person to get hit by it will absorb the hit. They get a big old burst of damage and a healing reduction by like a third for 8 seconds. You don't have to soak it if you're the tank, anyone else can. But if it's a low health enough target, it's going to pop them pretty hard. The War Machines aren't that big a deal. Yeah, they have that big old charge shot that the tanks might have to have a mitigation for, but it's the expert technicians you really have to worry about. They'll do two big things. One is a 3-second cast called Overcharge that'll buff the War Machine and giving it a 60% haste buff for 15 seconds. Interrupt it whenever you can. They'll also cast Repair on this War Machine, and it's a 2.5-second cast which heals the machine over a 5-second channel. Obviously, you can't interrupt this, but stun it with kicks and whatnot. Okay, first off, why do goblins have weirdly hard to pronounce names? Rixxa and all the other ones, and now you have Mogul Razdunk. It's a 2-phase fight, which first off deals with your typical tank and spank for the most part, but then goes in this really cool little minigame. So Razdunk has 2 abilities in the first phase. He'll cast Homing Missile, which will fixate on a non-tank random player, which prioritizes ranged players, and gains speed over time as it gets to you. If it hits you, or after 10 seconds of chasing, it'll explode, dealing a large burst of damage and applying a fire dot to all players within 20 yards of the missile. It's a really easy indicator to see, so if you do get fixated, get as far away from the group as long as possible. Yeah, you're not doing DPS, but dead DPS is 0 DPS. Razdunk will also channel a Gatling gun. After a little bit, he'll start rotating slowly, I believe in a clockwise rotation. Rotate with him. You don't want to get hit in the front of it because it kind of hurts. At about 50%, he then becomes the drill that will pierce the heavens! Giving you 3 stacks of configuration drill, he'll take damage reduction by 99%. Soon after, some big red rockets will come down to the encounter space, and when they land, they do a bunch of fire damage and give you a 6-second dot to move out of the way and they get close to them. I say that because Razdunk will then cast Drill Smash on a random selected player. If you get the little marker over your head, run over to one of the rockets because after a little bit, he'll fly over to you and attempt to slam on you. If you move out of the way, he'll hit the rocket instead, taking away one of the configuration drill stacks, and you have to do that 3 times until he gets back up and gets the shield. While Razdunk is airborne, you also have to deal with a few Venture Co. Sky Scorchers that will do what they normally do, so deal with them accordingly. Oh yeah, you want to deal with them actually pretty fast though, because they do not despawn when he goes back to phase 1. So, kill him faster. On higher difficulties, Razdunk will also summon 2 Boombas at the beginning of each phase 1. These ads will jump up to the sky and start casting out micro missiles. You'll see a bunch of tiny dots that get really scary, so move! On the bright side, you can still semi-track them by looking up at the sky. That way you don't have to always look down at your feet. And that is it for this dungeon run of the Motherlode! If you finish it in time and get lucky, you might get the schematic for the Meca-Mogul Mk2, which looks like a really cool updated version of Mimiron's head. That's pretty freaking awesome. As for me though, I've been Adrock and it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I will catch you on the flip side. Later.